Thank you all for coming. I was saying to Bill as he was showing me around, like, you can't imagine how much this place has changed. I feel like I've walked into Star Trek in the 23rd century. It was like 50 degrees when I was here, and everything was sort of falling apart. And I'm sure you're like, oh, you know, we used to walk barefoot to school, and you've heard that before, but you really have a great place here. So anyway, I want to tell you about this journey that I have been on that started right upstairs in the library. And the place I wanted to start, I think a place you've heard of, Hancock. And I understand it's sort of virtual Hancock now or something like that. So there's this barn at Hancock where we used to like make all the meals, and I guess we slept in the hay and stuff. And very, very simple life there. I guess it was the fall of Hancock. We had a little session with Mr. Merrill and on a bunch of hay, and he asked us the question, what is success in life? So like what would success mean to you? And this was the beginning of this sort of thing about, well, what is success? And I'm just interested. I mean, has anyone ever thought about this? Like, what is success for you? There's no wrong answer, but you live in 2014 at Commonwealth, anyone want to volunteer? It's like in business school, they cold call people and...
Yeah, make it.
Oh, come on. Oh, yes. So what is success for you?
Getting that house.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. So what else? I mean, you're spending all this time at this amazing place with all these beautiful facilities. Yes?
My dad so puts it, MBA equals BMW.
All right. So would that be MBA plus BMW? Oh, equals. Okay. And you've already determined BMW is? Okay, because you might. I'm sorry? Monetary. Okay. So dollars. Right. What else? I mean, honestly, like.
Happiness.
Oh my gosh, what a crazy idea. Wow. That seems pretty neat. I'm sorry?
Good job that you enjoy doing.
Okay, a good job you enjoy. What? Speak up. What?
Going to space.
Going to space, wow. Now, anywhere in particular in space? But as in like outer space? Okay. Any other like burning? Yes. I'm sorry? Oh God. If you can come right up here and do this, if it looks like that, great. But all right. Going back, to Commonwealth, and I don't know, some BS or whatever. Okay, so let's see if this works. Okay, so guess what I answered? Success to me is my father. Because I sort of looked at my parents and they seem very well adjusted. My father is kind of an entrepreneur. He runs this real estate management company that his father started. Financially successful, does a normal sort of job, fits in very well. And that was it for me. And I just thought, wow, he looks so happy, and what else is there? So, well, interesting thing that happened, they say, what is it like? People make plans, God laughs, that sort of thing. Like a really weird set of things happened to me that had nothing to do with success or any reason why I thought I was a Commonwealth. And that was that I absolutely loved computers when I was in 7th grade. Now, does anyone here like computers? Okay. Does anyone hate computers? Okay, yeah. Does anyone not ever have to deal with computers? Yeah, okay, so this was a really different world back in the mid-'70s, because if I said I'm interested in computers, it's like saying I'm into tractor trailers. And it's like, why would anyone be interested in tractor trailers? There's these things that big companies use, and they're boring and so on. But the thing, honestly, the reason why I went to Commonwealth, I don't think I ever admitted this to anyone, is that Commonwealth, in the lobby upstairs where you're sitting, had this state-of-the-art teletype that was hooked up to this time-sharing service, a PDP-8 computer in Waltham. And it's funny now, but like this really was like the coolest thing. This was like your BMW. I mean, I knew there was like classes here and stuff like that, but this was Commonwealth to me. So guess what happened? I got to Commonwealth, and what happened? The school got rid of the computer because it was too expensive and no one was using it. So, well, another interesting thing was going on. That I don't know if any of you have heard about this, but there's a magazine called Popular Electronics. And in 1975, they had this picture of this thing called an Altair 8800. And this was the actual first computer you could go out and buy as a person. It wasn't like $20,000 or $100,000. It was like $800. And there was a guy down the river at Harvard, and his friend got all excited about this. His name was Bill Gates. He went out and got one of these things, wrote something called BASIC, Microsoft BASIC, and dropped out of Harvard and started this thing called Microsoft. There was something on the West Coast called the Homebrew Computer Club. All these engineers, they got super excited about this. Their first meeting was to show people this amazing thing you can buy. And there was two guys in the audience named Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And they're like, wow, we could probably make one of these things too. So it all began with this. And so me and another student at Commonwealth named James Glazier, we had been reading all this stuff. And that teletype cost $3,000 a year for the school. What we figured out is the school could buy one of those Altairs. This was already, by the way, the next generation. By 1977, this is the Altair 8800A. This is like the latest thing in 1977. And we would get this all in kit form to stay under $3,000. So we figured out we could get a Southwest Technical Products CT64, which is the CRT. We were going to solder this all together. Oh, and there's no storage, by the way. And by the way, floppy disks haven't quite been invented yet. So this is how you actually load BASIC and use the whole thing. This is the future. Now, there was just one problem. We thought this was brilliant. No one else did at the school. And looking back on it, I think there were some fairly good questions like, well, so you guys you're gonna solder this together from a kit. Like, yeah, that's how we're gonna make it inexpensive. Well, have you ever done this before? Like, have you ever gotten one of these things working? And well, anyway, we were we were challenged, but I wasn't going to give up. So I had heard about these organizations in other parts of the country where you could go and get answers to all these questions from other computer users. And there was a guy in Boston who was starting a radio talk show on WBUR about computers. And I said, well, wrote and asked, is there anything like this? And he said, well, no, but a lot of people have been asking, why don't we start something? And we could call it the Boston Computer Society. So what happened then in 1977 was the school was completely unimpressed with our proposal. Okay, so just sort of picture me. I'm 13. I'm mostly pimples, braces. My voice is in the process of changing. I'm not like the most confident or comfortable person. But we come up with this idea. The radio talk show host is named Richard Gardner. And so Richard is going to be the presiding president of the Boston Computer Society. And my title is meeting coordinator, which meant the upstairs in the library, before it was all beautiful, it was like this icky linoleum floor. And my job was to sweep the floor up and put the tables together and set it all up for Richard to come in and run the meeting. So lo and behold, the Boston Computer Society started upstairs in the library. And the first meeting was in February 1977. And we had 2 people show up. One who was actually working late in the school and wandered in by accident because he thought it was something else. But I learned something about marketing, which like technology people eventually have to learn. And so I started making these flyers and little cards. And I can't even imagine driving at this point, being 14. But my father would drive me around to like MIT and college bulletin boards, and we put these flyers up. And it was amazing. By the second meeting, we had 300% growth. And 6 people came to the next meeting. So basically what happened was, okay, we got like the first meeting, we didn't have any guest speaker. Then eventually we'd like get someone who built something, some hobbyist, and they would come and demonstrate it. And then we would like have a salesperson from a computer store. And then we would get like a marketing person from a computer company. So you can sort of see like this pattern, like if I sort of make people believe that I'm not 14 years old and that like this thing is going on, it's like sort of inch up every month trying to do something a little better. So we had, by the 6th meeting, the most amazing company that you've probably never heard of called Wang Laboratories, which was one of the largest computer companies in Massachusetts. They were coming to unveil their new XYZ something or other. It was a personal computer that was about 3 times the size of this. And so they hauled it up into the library. The meeting, I've done my job perfectly. The floor is gorgeous. The speaker from Wang shows up, and it's 7:30, and everyone is sitting there, and our master of ceremonies is nowhere to be found. And I'm getting like more and more nervous. I have never like run a meeting or anything like that. And it's 8 o'clock, and so I stand up, and I'm like, well, I kind of, try not to let my braces show. Introduce the speaker. And so I called Richard the next day, and I'm like, what's going on? Where were you? And he said, well, my interests are changing, and I'm not going to be involved anymore, and you'll have to kind of pick things up. So 14-year-old me, I later learned that his new interest was that he shaved his head and joined a commune in Austria. And that was the end of him. But this basic idea of like, here's this thing I'm really passionate about, and it's like, well, if we can get someone from Wang, then maybe we can get someone from here. And then we actually outgrew the library, and we moved down here. And we got like this famous person you've never heard of named Wayne Green, who was the publisher of this famous magazine that's long gone called Kilobod. And it was like having Madonna, like the Madonna of the computer world, Wayne Green. And we sent out one of these postcards, and he was right here. And we packed the room. And so it just kept going on like that. And every month we'd kind of go after someone more and more important. So eventually, after getting a little bit more ambitious, I arrived at this place by October of 1980, where we had the CEOs of all of the major personal computer companies talking about the future of the personal computer industry. And this is Mike Markkula is on the end, who's the CEO of Apple. That little fellow you can barely see over on the left, that little guy is Bill Gates. And there's the president of IBM Personal Computer Division. And this was just doing it like a little bit more. Well, the other thing was we started doing user group meetings, and the first one was for the Commodore PET, which met up on the 3rd floor, and we had one for educators, and we started a user group for the Apple II, and then we decided let's do a special event to launch that, and then that got sort of out of hand, and we ended up renting this place called the Park Plaza Castle, which is across from the Park Plaza Hotel. It was called Apple Fest 81. We had 10,000 people who came from all over the world. And I'm like, okay, this is a big deal. I'm going to call the head of sales for Apple in New England and ask if we could get Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak to come. And sure enough, Steve Jobs shows up, and who's like the most perfect perfectionist in the world. And that was like my mission in life, to try to impress him, which there's some funny stories. But what this eventually led to was a really amazing relationship with Steve and Apple, and something that was just written up on the 30th anniversary of the Macintosh was that we actually rented John Hancock Hall around the corner, and Steve Jobs came and did the first public showing of the Macintosh anywhere in the world, and we had 1,200 people for that. So now, what is this like to be this like awkward, insecure, gawky, braced teenager, things started going crazy. I felt like one of those like childhood movie stars. So there was a bizarre situation. We had a dinner with Steve Jobs at a restaurant where he stood up. It was the most expensive restaurant in Boston, almost in the United States, called L'Espalier. He stood up in the middle of the restaurant, starts making this speech to everyone about this show, Applefest, and it's like this guy, Jonathan, organized it, and Jonathan is 19, and he's single, and we need to find him a girlfriend. And I'm like somewhere under the table, and there's a couple at another table. They're like, oh, our daughter's available. And I mean, this is like surreal. Honestly, this was nothing I ever planned. I'm just like honestly, just trying to convince Commonwealth to buy a computer because I'm into computers. This is totally freaky and surreal. And so then outside of the restaurant, there's this reporter from the Wall Street Journal there, and he's like, Jonathan, I think we'd like to do an article about you. I'm like, well, no, you're here to write about Steve Jobs. And he's like, well, no, I understand that. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by an article? And he's like, well, we do this thing on the front page called the A header, and we do like these little etchings. And I'm like, I'm going to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal at the age of 19. And it just, I mean, okay. It sounds amazing, but I'm actually like having a lot of anxiety challenges at this point. I get a call several days after this comes out that CBS Evening News wants to follow me for 2 days of my life between Brown and Boston, and Charles Osgood does all this stuff. And then it just goes crazy. So, I mean, talk about success, like what everyone talks about. We end up in the New York Times, Business Week, these computer things, People magazine, Cosmopolitan names the Boston Computer Society one of the 10 best places to meet men in Boston. And I'm suddenly this person now. So okay, now something I imagine I heard from a lot of people that. There are many, many teenagers that hate your guts because their parents are like, well, why can't you start a computer society and do all this stuff? So I'm like, it's this totally weird thing because again, there was no big plan or vision or anything. And so you would think like, isn't this a perfect life? Well, so here's the reality of like me inside of all of this is like, I actually had no friends at school. I felt in every way like the important things. I mean, I kept getting told, well, okay, there's this computer thing, but that's not real life. Like real life is, doing well in classes, getting into the right college, which I was very stressed about. I mean, the ultimate bottom was an unnamed teacher at Commonwealth. My midterm for senior year basically gave me a C- for calculus and said that, made it clear that this C- was a gift that you do not deserve, and it is one you will have to earn. And that, that's like how I felt about myself. I was very anxious about talking in class. I started to develop like panic attacks, which I didn't really understand what that was. I have the distinction in this long line of Rotenbergs of being the first one ever to be rejected by Harvard. I don't know if this has like gotten into the, sort of common knowledge, but I didn't hear this until years after Commonwealth, that there's a saying about Commonwealth graduates that half of them go to Harvard and the other half go to McLean. Okay, this is a long time ago. This is like back during World War II, and it was, but this is sort of where I was. So basically, I was kind of on my way to McLean. There was nothing outside of the BCS that was my whole life. And then here's the interesting thing, is whatever you get that's success, it always goes away. And so what actually happened was that, it sounds nice that we shut it down, but the BCS had this long, gruesome, slow death. And then all of a sudden, I'm this highly dysfunctional, ill-adjusted teenager who's never been in the real world and like learning how to get a job and having any social skills or any self-confidence. So it looks so perfect from the outside, but this is sort of the reality of my life from pretty much about 30 years. And so much of it I really attribute to our society's focus on success. And the worst thing is like when you actually get it, and it's like, I finally made it. It's like the happy ending in the movie. Now I can go on with life. It actually doesn't work that way. The weird thing is when you have it, you get used to it. Like think about, I don't know, what's something that you like for dessert? And it was like the most amazing thing when you first had it, and now you have it, every night, and now it's gone. Like, what do you do? I mean, it's weird, but everything is like that. So when you focus on success, it's so hard to hold on to, and then when you don't have success, it's just all failure. And this little tiny thing called just fine, which is so ridiculous, like in our world today, who would pursue just fine? So now I'm going to try to condense like the last 30 years into about 10 minutes. I was saying this is like writing a little PhD dissertation. So basically, okay, success in Western civilization, with these four big things, we want to achieve, we want to like get all these degrees and good college, a good job. We want wealth and power, we want to be recognized and respected, and we want to get lots of stuff, like a BMW, or you might realize like Audi is actually a little better designed, or, but it's, you get freedom and choice. Okay, but what do all of these things have in common? Everything that we define as success is external to us. And this is like, it's hard to believe, I know, like at this time in your life, because it seems like things are so solid when people finally arrive. But actually, every one of these things is temporary. You get it, and then it is going to be gone, and all you feel is the loss of it. So as Bill mentioned, I'm writing this book about Steve Jobs, who is a really interesting person in a lot of ways, because in terms of the definition of success, Steve Jobs was like hyper success on steroids. And if you look at like all of these categories, he was the first person in history to create a $500 billion company, like blowing away Exxon, Walmart, everything. He came close to Edison, who had 1,000 patents, about approximately. Steve had 346 patents. He reinvented 12 hyper-competitive, multi-billion-dollar industries. He died with $6 billion in net worth. Talk about powerful. He was named one of the world's 20 most powerful people. Okay, it wasn't like one of the 10 most powerful, but that's pretty good. He received the National Medal of Technology from the President of the United States. He was also named the greatest entrepreneur of all time. But here's something interesting, like the stuff. For years, he lived with 4 pieces of furniture and 2 posters in this big empty place. And does anyone know what the 2 posters were? His 2 favorite people? Einstein and Gandhi were his 2 role models. So a lot of people look at Steve Jobs and think like this is the model, like we should all try to be Steve Jobs. And something really, really weird happened the day that I met Steve Jobs that sort of has changed everything. One very simple thing, which was Steve was going to be talking before 2,000 people at the Park Plaza Hotel around the corner. My job was to get him there, and he's talking at 2 o'clock, and we're all set, and it's 2 minutes before 2, and I hear behind me, Jonathan, would you excuse me for a minute? And I turn around, I'm like, that was Steve Jobs, and he disappeared. So we have like 2,000 crazy people. It's like the first Beatles concert in the United States. Everyone is like going crazy, and like the speaker has disappeared. And now I'm like a very, very mature, what am I, like 20 years old, I guess. No, I was actually 19. Okay, so I'm still, this is very, very stressful. I'm looking everywhere, and he's absolutely gone. And suddenly, it's now like 5 after 2. I look behind a corner, and there's like a piece of an arm sticking out. And what I discover is Steve Jobs was like sitting on the floor meditating in just this envelope of silence. And I'm like, what is that? It was just so mysterious and peculiar and just so at odds with this crazy scene that was going on. And so this has really been my journey of trying to understand what was happening. And so part of the story is that Steve, as a teenager, was very interested in philosophy and Eastern mysticism. And he was very skeptical about how the world worked. And he was really into technology and business. He liked business, but sort of this was like the image of what business is like in the United States. It's like, you're fired. It's sort of morally bankrupt, but it seems to do a really good job. Then he's reading about Eastern mysticism, which is all of this wonderful peace and enlightenment. He was very intrigued with enlightenment. But the Buddha never thought about how to have an economy. And this is like the monks are all beggars, and that's basically how the economy worked. So basically his question was, is there a better way to do this? So anyway, to just shortcut 30 years later, since we only have about 10 minutes, okay, this is what I figured out. And this is the first time I've ever presented this to anyone. This is like my 30 years of research and thinking. Let's see if I can do this in like 5 minutes or so. Okay, so we live with a bunch of assumptions in the Western Hemisphere that I would say are sort of like water and fish. There's a saying that I don't know who discovered water, but I'm sure it wasn't a fish. And the point being that like when you're so in the middle of something, when you live in a culture, in a civilization, you can't see what is kind of driving everyone and everything because you're right in the middle of it. So we live in a world that's based on doing. We're always doing things. And there's basically 3 types of things. Everything in life, and the Buddha figured this out, comes down to 3 things. There's stuff that is enjoyable. So achieving all of the success stuff and just good everyday desserts or whatever it is that you like. Then there's stuff that's neutral, which is not good or bad, it's just sort of boring. And then there is the unpleasant, the really bad stuff in life, failing, being humiliated, losing friendships, losing loved ones, and experiencing pain. So we are wired basically to deal with these 3 things as follows. Anything that's enjoyable, we want to hold on to it. Success, when you get it, it's really, really hard to let go of it because your body just sort of internalizes it and it's part of you. So we try to hold on to enjoyable things. We basically try to ignore the neutral things, and you probably can think of a few things like that. And then we're always pushing away what's unpleasant. So this is like a lot of the model that drives what we do every single day is holding on to good stuff, pushing bad stuff away. Now the Eastern view is completely shifting everything, and instead of looking at the things, the Eastern view is looking at the space in between the things. And this is what we call nothing, emptiness. And this is why a lot of people are really skeptical about Buddhism and these Eastern things. It's like, you're talking about nothing. Well, not exactly. We're talking about space. And what exists in the space between you and your life, between each of the things that you encounter, what exists is your relationship to them. And so the way we innately relate to enjoyable things is we cling to them and crave them. We relate to neutral things with sort of boredom and being ignorant, and we have aversion to the unpleasant. So what we're doing in all of this meditation and stuff is we're looking at what's in the space, in the relationship. And so what is this weird thing that Steve Jobs is doing that people are getting into? So meditation is basically cultivating a practice of steadying the mind, of becoming more and more aware of what's going on in each moment of your life, of learning to greet everything and everyone with compassion and kindness, including yourself, and really fundamentally changing your relationship to everything. And it's something that you just keep working at. And so basically, as you sit, just all of your life is coming up, and you're looking at it, and it's sort of like developing awareness, someone said, is like pouring water into a sponge. It's like you take these things and you're just pouring your awareness, and they start to kind of break apart. And as they break apart, you have insights. So, so basically, this is what things look like in our Western society. What Steve Jobs is doing, and what I've been really trying to understand, is what actually happens when you spend years meditating with your moment-by-moment experience. And what you do is you transform each of these relationships. So enjoyable things like success, this is all really counterintuitive. Whatever success you get, you throw it away. You get it, you throw it away. And I've been practicing this a lot lately because strangely there's some things that are going really well for me right now, and my meditation teachers just throw them away, throw them away, throw them away, because they're temporary. Really, really counterintuitive. So enjoyable things, you enjoy them, throw them away. What about neutral things? You greet everything with curiosity and freshness, as if this dumb thing, like this stupid math problem or whatever, is like the first math problem you've ever seen in your life and the last you will ever see before you die. And you develop that kind of a relationship to neutral things. And then the unpleasant, instead of pushing away, you move into, and you actually metabolize the difficult parts of your life. Just like you metabolize food, you move into, break them down, and that's where you develop wisdom. So again, just sort of summarizing about 15 years of stuff, there's all these different ways of thinking that we're conditioned with in the West. We focus on stuff, like the stuff. The Eastern traditions are about the space between the stuff. We tend to think a lot about the past and the future. The Eastern tradition is actually, you know what, none of that exists. It's all a figment of your imagination. The only thing that exists is the present moment. We're all about thinking. Steve Jobs actually wasn't into business school or any of the theories of business. And this is fascinating because theories actually get in the way between you and your own experience. So instead of thinking, the East is about raw experience. And so basically, there's like these two different worlds. And Steve Jobs went to India to try to understand, you know, what is this Eastern thing? There's nothing to attain. It's all right here. You just have to pay attention to how beautiful your life is. It's wonderful, but how is that going to get you your BMW or, you know, pay for your kids' college tuition? You know, so then we have our view in the West that, you know, okay, you're going to go to Commonwealth and college, and then just around the corner, boom, you know, is success. Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, isn't it wonderful? But there's this problem that you'll discover as you get around there. It's like the picture doesn't change. There's just more, you know, more of it, and it's like the sun is always over there, and then it's like you sort of give into this rat race. So what's the answer to all of this? So basically the answer is you put them both together and you look at your life as a constant process. It's not ever getting somewhere, it's everything continually happening and unfolding. So you're in the middle of it. You have a set of goals and aspirations. You want to do great in college and get a great job and marry someone wonderful. But you live always in the present moment. So that's where reality is always grounded in your feet in the moment. Then you go through life, and life is actually, you're going to be constantly facing successes and failures and pleasure and pain, and people are going to blame you, and you're going to feel totally stupid and incompetent, and then you're going to feel great. It's all part of the experience. But then what you do is you meditate, which is just like sleep for sort of our physical bodies. This is kind of for our life experience. You bring awareness and kindness and non-clinging. And what happens is you develop amazing insights, you become wise, you become vastly more creative, and then you do your version, your personal version of creating the $500 billion company. And this is how it all works. It's like all in this picture. But since I want to leave time for questions, basically, and we can share this with you, it's like it's not that one is right or wrong. It's like, how do you put the two together? How do you have goals without being attached to outcomes? How do you like plan but live in the present moment? It's like you don't need to leave Commonwealth and just become a monk. You can do both, and they actually fit together really, really nicely. And here's the most amazing part of it is like a lot of people get to this when they've had a really bad period in life and they start to feel a kind of a spiritual calling, and this sort of happened to me. And when you do this practice, it is so mysterious, and I can't begin to explain it, but something happens about you discover something about who you really are. So my whole model of like, I'm going to be like my father, well, I actually failed in every single way that my father defined success. And I found something that was completely, utterly unique. And it's this sort of the way these things start to work together. This is a kind of a classic thing, I don't know if you've seen, called the candlestick illusion. And it's, imagine this is like your life. You're making this concrete thing, this candlestick. But is that all that's there? Is it just this thing that we're creating? And the suggestion is that as you become more and more aware, you realize there's something else going on. And if you see like the faces, that's sort of the kind of the universe working in this very, very subtle and unique way, and kind of you being created as something very, very unique. So anyway, okay, so the last thing is, what does this mean for you personally? This parable of the cracked pot, which I feel is like such a great story for Commonwealth students, because I assume if you were just an average, ordinary person, you wouldn't be at Commonwealth. You're here because you're really, really different and amazing. So there's this story of this servant who carries 2 pots of water for his master, and one of them has a crack. And no matter how hard the pot tries, the water just leaks out. And the pot is just, basically, I'm a horrible pot. I failed as a pot. I can't do my basic pot responsibility, which is to hold the water in. And basically, to just get to the point, since we need to get finished here. So it turns out that the leak in the pot has been creating this incredible row of flowers. And so every time with the servant has kind of walked back from the water, this whole row of beautiful flowers has grown up. And it sort of starts to then raise the question, well, what are we really here for? Because we think we're here to be like this pot and to do the job that society defines. But what would you rather leave behind? Like, you did your job, or you created something that is utterly and uniquely you. And so the last thing is really, this is something that Steve Jobs said at the Stanford graduation in 2005, is basically don't try to be Steve Jobs. That's the worst, stupidest thing you can do. Don't live someone else's life, because guess what? They're already doing it. And when he says follow your heart and intuition, it's really, this developing this mindfulness, because it's all inside. And so that's what I learned over 30 years, and hope it's helpful.